Today we are going through the complete FPV drone flying tutorial from beginner to pro, flying cinematic, freestyle, whatever you want to get you started. So I've been flying FPV for about 6 months now, and I'd say I'm a pretty good cinematic pilot. However, there's always more to learn. But what I really struggled with when I started flying FPV was that you'd have to watch 5 to 10 videos, go on so many different resources just to get every piece of information you need to put it together to start flying. So I'm going to try and put every single detail you need, so this video is all you need to start flying. And that being said, I may not offer that many explanations as to why I pick certain things, but you can trust I'm a cheapo and I'm going to give you the cheapest option possible to try and achieve what we want to achieve. And if you have any questions as to why I pick certain things over others, leave in the comments. I'll make a separate video if people are very interested. But let's get going. So the absolute first step to start flying FPV with basically no money investment for now is you need a controller to start getting on the simulator. I would recommend buying the good old DJI FPV remote. This will save you so much pain in the future because this one remote can connect to every single drone you have and you don't need anything else or any soldering or anything like that to get flying. That being said, that option is for someone who is pretty convinced they're going to get going and they will fly, because the remote's not cheap. It's about like $400, $500. So the second option is buying the Tango 2. It is fairly cheap, about $200, $300. And it will give you some difficulties in the future trying to actually fly a drone, but even if you change your mind and end up buying the other remotes, worst case scenario, you just sell it, you'll lose like 50 bucks, but it's a great remote for at least simulating. It's even good for flying a drone as well. And if you don't even want to invest 200 bucks into a remote, what you can do is just get an Xbox controller or anything with 2 joysticks and start getting on the simulator. The only issue with that is if you look here, the throttle, wherever you move it, it stays there. Obviously, an Xbox doesn't do that, but that being said, it's still better than nothing, and you can get a feel for it and see how much you like simulating. So you may be wondering which simulator you should buy. I would say getting on Liftoff. It's 30 bucks. That's what I learnt on, and it made me pretty good. The other recommendation I have is Velocidrone, because it actually has moving objects which you can practice flying a drone around, which Liftoff does not have. And if you want to like chase cars or chase people running, that can be really helpful for you to get that cinematic skill down pat before you go to the field. But that's just another option. I can't stand by it because I never use it. Liftoff works great. Alright, so now you've actually got a remote and you've bought Liftoff. You might be wondering, what the hell do I do? So how you practice on Liftoff, I would say, is definitely using races. You need an objective to follow and make sure that you can actually complete a race and make the drone go where you want to go. So there's a couple of benchmarks you need to reach in order to, say, actually start flying real life. The first one is simulate for at least 10 hours. Probably 20 is more ideal, but at least 10 hours. Number 2, complete a lift-off race from start to finish, ensuring that you don't crash. So one thing when it comes to using the drone simulator is how you actually grip the sticks when you fly the drone. I recommend using either pinching or hybrid grip. It's basically when you have 2 fingers. I like using hybrid, where it's just thumbs and you put your index fingers above, so you get that extra control. Just use 2 fingers and you'll be a much better pilot. Trust me, that's a bit controversial, but 2 fingers is better. When you are on the drone simulator, you should also keep in mind what camera angle you use. The camera angle basically means how fast the drone will fly. So for example, if your camera angle is at 15 degrees, your drone, when it's looking straight, will be at 15 degrees, which means you'll go like this fast. Basically what I'm trying to say is when you use the simulator, you want to start maybe a bit lower, 10 or 15 degrees, to get used to not going that fast. But you should be able to build up to at least 20 degrees. I would definitely recommend being comfortable flying at 25 degrees because there's a lot of situations you want to go that fast. Going even further than that is kind of optional, but 20 degrees / 25 is a good place to be. Okay, so now that you've used the simulator and you're feeling pretty good, you actually enjoy flying the simulator, which is very important. If you don't enjoy it, or at this stage, you should probably just not get into it because there's a ton of money that's about to come into it. Just to be warned. FPV is going to cost you probably at least 2,000 Australian dollars depending on which route you go. But in general, it's going to be around that price point. If you crash, it's going to be even more than that, so keep this in mind. So if you're not ready to fork out $2,000 just yet, that's all good. Just keep simulating. I used a simulator for 100 hours before I even flew the drone. So you can take as long as you want, be as patient as you want, and just enjoy a simulator. Like, honestly, it's kind of fun too. So now there's 2 options we can choose to fly FPV drones. The first one is DJI FPV, which I obviously did not choose, but a lot of people shit on this option, but it's really not that bad. And as someone who's picked the second option, which is the drones that you buy / build. DJI FPV honestly is probably cheaper than all the crap you have to buy for these build / bind and fly drones yourself. There's so many extra peripherals you need to buy when flying build yourself FPV, which is what I'm just gonna call it for now. For example, batteries, chargers, you need stuff to fix this with, you need like tools to fix this with, soldering irons, the list just goes on, which we will talk about later. But the DJI FPV, you just basically start it, it always works, it's reliable, there's return to home, the connection and the range is ridiculous. The biggest drawback is probably the shitty camera, but people put GoPros on it, and honestly, if the GoPro's on it, that's basically the same thing as this, right? I would say if you're not really trying to be a hardcore content creator, and you're not trying to like thread really tight gaps and do crazy acrobatic maneuvers, DJI FPV would be perfect for your use case. And look, worst case scenario, you need the goggles anyway to fly this drone. So worst case scenario, you just fly the drone itself and the controller, and you just keep the goggles and you build your own drone. So there's that. And if this was a guide for DJI FPV, that would literally be it, because you just buy it, start it. Now that you use the simulator, you can just get flying. So it's that easy. Now let's move into the build your own FPV drone. Alright, so first of all, if you want to fly these build your own drones, it's kind of ironic, but we buy a bind and fly straight off the bat. And what a bind and fly is, it's just a drone that's already like built, so you can bind it to your receiver and your goggles and you can start flying ASAP. I would recommend the Nazgul Evoke or just the Nazgul, whichever version you have available to you. Those drones are really solid, very sturdy and very beginner proof. I'm actually flying the iFlight Titan, which is basically built like a tank. If you crash it, it'll be fine, and these drones work perfect. When buying your first drone, you may get a lot of people telling you should buy a 5-inch drone or a like Cinewhoop, which is what this is. A Cinewhoop is just like a guided drone. Look, I'm gonna keep this really simple. Buy a 5-inch drone. These are super maneuverable through the air, a ton of fun flying. Cinewhoops are just kind of lame, and they're a lot more fragile, and it's just not as fun and like well controlled as a 5-inch quad. I also forgot to mention real quick, make sure the drone you buy is a 6S drone. Do not buy a 4S drone. In short, 6S is like a bigger battery. It's future-proofing yourself. Don't mess with 4S, just buy a 6S drone. The next thing we need to buy, which is absolute must, is the goggles. So these are the DJI V2 goggles. You can buy the V1s as well, whatever you can get your hands on. And really quick, the reason we buy the DJI goggles is we want to fly digital, right? Long story short, even the freestyle pilots at Rotor Riot fly digital. Obviously, analog drones are cheaper. Just trust me, digital is the way to go. Don't waste your money on that at all. Alright, so now we need to worry about batteries. Buy this charger. I'm just gonna chuck it up with the name of it. I actually don't know what it's called. Also, you're going to need some lipo batteries. I got the Avonix, I don't know how to say it, 1600 milliamp hour, 120C batteries. The China Hobby Line batteries work great too. Or you can also buy the 1300, 100C batteries. Long story short, 120C around 1500 milliamp hours is probably the most ideal battery for the drones I recommended earlier. Also, you should really buy a ammo box for you to charge your batteries. And this is mainly because if you watch some videos of lipos going on fire in a lipo bag, they don't do shit. Alright, you need a ammo box or like a bat safe box to make sure if your batteries do go on fire, then this will contain it and your house will not burn down, and that's the last thing we want to happen there. That being said, lipo fires are very rare. You've got to be a complete idiot for that to happen, but better safe than sorry. Alright, more crap you need. You need a prop tool. This is the Ethics prop tool. Basically, this helps you screw the prop nuts so you can put your props on. You need props. These are the Ethics S5 props. They work great. Go ahead and buy them. The iFlight Nazgul props work well as well. I like these the most. Up to you. Props are basically everyone's preference. You can pick whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. What you're also going to need is a soldering iron. I'll put the name of whatever this one is. It's great. Just buy this one. You're going to need some hex screwdrivers. This isn't actually a hex screwdriver. You need to be able to unscrew and screw certain size of hex nuts. Your dad probably has these lying around. If not, you should buy a kit I recommend here. You're also going to need some solder and some flux, which is over there. I can't be bothered getting. Flux basically makes your solder joints nice and smooth and makes soldering a lot easier. We don't have to talk about that right now because you're never going to crash, right? So don't worry about that for now. But when you do, you're going to need this stuff. Now, assuming you want to film your footage when you fly, like everyone does, right, you need to pick a GoPro. So the only two GoPros you should buy is either GoPro 8, which I recommend. It's super cheap right now because the 10 is out. It basically does everything a 10 can do, but it can't do 4K 60 frames 4:3, which gives you a bit of slow-mo, but the footage looks amazing. I'll put some up right here. The GoPro 10 is for when you are pro, you're confident, and you can afford flying this $500 on your drone and not losing it. All right, so this is everything you need to buy. I'll put out the most important things, and things like solder, flux, etc. You don't actually have to buy it right now, but you should, because if you never crash, you won't need it, but if you crash, you're gonna need this stuff. So now that we've actually bought all this crap, the first thing we do is we get the remote, we get the goggles, we plug them in the computer using the USB-C port, pretty self-explanatory. Install the DJI FPV assistant, plug them in, and they should show up, and you just update them accordingly. Now you've updated everything, we need to sort out the props. There are two props that exist, ones that point kind of this way and ones that point to the left this way. What we want to do is we want the props to point outwards. So if you can see here, you've got the curved edge and the straight edge. We want the curved edges to point outwards, all right? So make sure they point outwards on the two front arms. And if you look at this one, see how the curved edge points outwards. And now that this one points outwards, all you have to do is get the exact same identical prop, put it here, you put the exact same prop from here, put it down here, and then that's the orientation that we want. I'm pretty sure when you buy these drones that on Betaflight, which is basically like the software inside what makes these things fly, it's kind of already set to props out, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as the props are facing outwards, and this is how you need to put your props to get flying. Okay, so another thing before you fly, I know the list goes on, but you want to set your camera angle. We mentioned this earlier when we were doing the simulator, but to actually set your camera angle, for example, I said earlier you should do 15, 20, maybe 25 degrees. I think the best thing to do is you download, it's called a clinometer. I don't know if I said that right. It tells you the angle where you're at. So for example, the camera's there, you kind of align it to the camera and you pick what degree you want. So like 25, and then you get like a rough idea, and it's fairly accurate. So now that the FPV camera is actually set to the right level, when you mount your GoPro, you should have the right screws if you bought the drone. Basically all you do is you kind of just eyeball it. You mount the GoPro to somewhere where it looks like the lens, aka the FPV camera, is on the same angle as the GoPro, so it's like parallel to each other, and then that's basically perfect to get flying. And it's very important to have the same angle, otherwise what you see in the goggles is not what you get, and you're going to be disappointed and sad. And also, don't forget to hit record when you're recording. Man, that's happened to me a shit ton of times. You don't want that to be you. Now let's talk about charging our FPV LiPo battery. So this is where you gotta really pay attention, because these can cause fires. They're dangerous. People talk about this a lot. And as long as you follow basically what I say and the LiPo battery guidelines, you should be completely fine. Alright, so how to charge these batteries is, as you can see here, this is a 1600 milliamp battery. You always want to charge your batteries at 1C. So basically what that means is you get the milliamps or the capacity and you divide by 1000. So 1600 divided by 1000 is 1.6. And that's how many amps you want to charge this at. Every other setting on the charger, I'm just gonna put it on screen right now. So if you had this exact same battery, on the screen right now is what settings you want when actually charging this on the exact charger that I told you to buy. If, for example, this was a 1500 battery, all you do is 1500 divided by 1000, that's 1.5 amps, you charge at that rate. And that is 1C. If you are lazy and you want to charge your batteries faster, which is not good for battery health, you can do 2 amps, which basically is 1.6 times 2, which is you charge at 3.2 volts, but just be safe. Charge at 1 amps, which is 1.6 amps for this battery, and you'll be sweet. When you're charging, this is when you use the ammo box. Chuck the charger and the battery in the ammo box. So if it, for some reason, it explodes, your house will be fine. We don't want any houses burning down. Okay, so now that everything's up to date, we're going to have to connect this drone to the controller and the goggles, but to do that, we need to power it on. So how we power it on is basically you get the battery, pop it on here. I really recommend using 2 straps. You strap it on, I'm not gonna do it right now, but basically all you do is you get this plug here. This is a XT60 plug and it goes in there. You plug it in, and it goes off. Alright, that means it's on. Make sure it's plugged in properly. Now with this plugged in. Alright, so I basically butchered this part, but binding everything is really easy. All you have to do is you go on your goggles, get your paper clip, poke that hole in your goggles, and then there should be a beeping noise. Then you go to your air unit or Calyx Vista. There's a button on the Calyx Vista and a hole on the air unit, and then you poke that hole, and then the light should turn solid red, but once everything has bound together, it will go back to green. Now we do the exact same thing but using the remote. So here, instead of poking something, we hold the empty button, the record button, and we push down the right dial all at the same time. And then you do the same thing, go to the air unit and poke the hole. The light turns red and then back to green once it's all paired up and all good, and then everything is bound. So one more thing before you should start flying is you should map out how you configure the actual drone remote. Basically how we do that is you get the drone, you get a USB-C cable, and then we plug it into the flight controller, not the air unit as shown. Next we download betaflight as per Joshua Bardwell's video. It's not that hard. He gives you the links, just download it. And then you'll be able to see which levers or little flicks or switches or whatever they're called maps to what settings you have, for example arming the drone. So I'm going to put up exactly what settings I have. You can copy that if you want, and then you'll be able to get going and fly. But basically each lever should do a certain thing, and we want to make sure it does the right thing we want to do. So now we are finally up to flying the drone for the first time. Like I mentioned before, you get the battery, plug it in, make sure these straps are tied around the drone, make sure the little balance cable, this thing isn't like hanging down near the props, because your drone's going to cut this thing up and you don't want that to happen, because that's how you charge the battery. Make sure it's like tucked up like this kind of. For example, just make sure it's tucked up like that. If you set your settings right like I did, this lever here, if you can see, this one here is what I like to arm the drone with. Obviously you can pick whatever the hell you want, but that's what I like to do. Pushing away from me is off, and when you push towards you all the way, that's going to arm the drone, and that basically means the props are going to start spinning and it's active for you to fly whenever you want. And when you're ready, you increase the throttle and then away you go. Your first flight, try not to crash, and you need to be able to like get your finger ready there, so when you want to land you flick it off, and the second you flick it off it's going to fall out of the sky, so you should be close to the ground at this point. So while you're in your first flight, one thing that's super important is looking at how much voltage you have left so you don't ruin your lipos. So you'll see a total voltage in the bottom right corner of your goggles. It starts around like 24, 25 or something like that, and basically once it hits 21 volts, that's when you know it's time to get your drone back and you need to land. You don't want to see like your drone ever dipping down 20 volts or below, or like even when you see like 20.5 volts, you should definitely land that thing ASAP. And that is basically it. That is your first flight. You put the GoPro on, the GoPro's recording, it looks amazing. What you should also keep in mind is when you film on a GoPro, you should always film 4x3, because what FPV pilots do is you get the footage, you put in real steady go or gyroflow, and gyroflow is completely free. Basically what you do is you get your 4x3 footage, chuck in the gyroflow, it stabilizes and it looks amazing, and now you've got beautiful FPV footage that you can share with everyone, and now you're an FPV pilot. So I know this may be very fast paced and a little bit rushed, but I'm trying to keep it succinct. If you have any questions at all, leave in the comments, I'll get back to it. And there is much more to FPV than just that. Many different things to talk about as well, so stay tuned, subscribe to the channel. There is more FPV content, more tutorials coming, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Happy flying!